Now, Benin's National Assembly has approved a constitutional amendment extending the presidential term from actually 5 to 7 years, while retaining the 2-term limit and creating a Senate, a move critics say could actually weaken democratic checks and entrench ruling elites. The reform passed with 90 votes in favor and 19 against, despite opposition complaints about the speed and transparency of the process is generating a lot of talks now. President Patrice Talon, set to leave office next April after his second term, is seen backing Finance Minister Romuald Wadagni as his likely successor. And the Senate will have at least 25 members, including presidential appointees and former presidents, raising concerns that outgoing leaders could retain significant influence. So at this point, we are joined by Levi Mboshu, a political analyst who joins me from Kinshasa, DR Congo. Thank you so much for coming around. And I understand I have Godwin Toko, Deputy Team Leader, Agora Centre for Research.
Hello, good evening, and can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, so we'll just start with Godwin. Hopefully, if we can get Levi to join us during the course of the conversation, then definitely we'll entertain him. So, Godwin, now, Benin's National Assembly has extended the presidential term from 5 to 7 years. And if re-elected, we are going to see a case whereby one person will spend about 14 years in office if, re-elected, and there's going to be another, kind of election. Now, what do you see as regards these new constitutional amendments?
Yeah, so I'm joining you from Kampala, Uganda.
Okay, you're welcome.
I think it's normally a very slippery slope. What happened, for instance, if I'm to use the experience of Uganda, in 2005, there was a presidential term limit of 2 terms, each of 5 years. And the president said, and his party said, that was not enough. The country had some instability. They had to stabilize the country and things like that. So we went through this slippery slope that the term limit was removed from the constitution. Then in 2017, there was another provision in the constitution that said the president would serve only up to 75. The president was about 74 around the time that was also removed. So the total sum of this is that we've had one person serving as president in Uganda since 1986. For those who do the math, that's about 39 years of one man serving at the helm as the president. Now, of course, there's been tremendous achievement in the time that he has been president. But now, as he gets older, I think he's now about 82 years, close to 40 years in power. There's this anxiety that grips the nation of what happens after him. What if he sleeps one day, like all of us will probably, and does not wake up? And then you have examples of countries where one person has served for far too long, and then they lead to instability. So I said this to say that the idea that only one person can implement their vision, that 10 years of 5 years each is such a short term, is really not the case. I think that it could even be shorter. It could even be 3 years, it could even be 4 years like they have in the US. But if we see a nation as more than a person, or more than a party, or more than a group of men, and we look at it from the angle of continuity, in Uganda, Kampala, there's a common saying of a tofali, which means a brick, that if you're making a house, every brick counts. So everyone comes and puts onto the house their brick. In other words, they build each by adding a brick, and then someone picks it up from there. So I think we'll see, and we'll wait and see how it plays out. But my fear is that Benin is taking the slippery slope that Uganda took in 2005, which now has put us in a situation where there's a lot of anxiety, because the idea that one person only can transform a country, it has to be their vision. They need more time. No one else can do it. Is rather ridiculous. Because I mean, if the constitution envisages that a term is 7 years, now what of those who would lose? Because if it says it's 7 years, then it means that probably someone can lose after 7 years. So if someone lost after 7 years, that means that they won't have the 14 years. If 14 years is not enough, what about 17 years? So for me, from what I see, I think that it's a big mistake.
You say it's a big mistake, Godwin, but then supporters argue that a 7-year term allows leaders more time to implement long-term developmental projects. Some people say it will ensure stability and would make it impossible for policy somersaults. And it would also reduce the cost of having to process another electoral cycle. So are these not valid justifications for this new amendment?
Yeah, they are valid depending on how you look at them. But if you look at them from the angle of a country should be beyond an individual, a political party, or a group of people. A country should be about everyone making their contribution. If a president came and made their contribution in 10 years, that should be sufficient, and they should move on and pass the baton to somebody else. And if you build a country on such strong and firm foundation, then there is no need to worry that it won't go in a particular direction. It won't take a particular trajectory. The only problem becomes if you make it about, okay, let's agree. If they elect the president in April next year and he serves 5 months and dies, what happens? Does Benin cease to exist? Because that can also happen. Tanzania, next to Uganda, elected the president in 2020, and he served I think about 6 months, President John Pombe Magufuli, and then he passed on. We've seen presidents dying in power. The idea that one person needs all this time to implement, no, it shouldn't be like that. It should be that there should be institutions. There should be a government in Benin. There should be parliament and all these institutions where faces come and go. If it were up to me, it should even be about 3 years for each of those faces to come and go. So the stability is tested, and then it becomes firm to the point that things can move on regardless of the individuals. Some of the countries we admire, whether it be China, whether it be America, they've reached a point where they seem to have systems that are very, very strong and beyond the individuals. It doesn't matter who is in Uganda, we say the chair. It doesn't matter who is in the chair, who is the president, or who is the prime minister. Things will continue going in a particular direction. So I think that is what Africans should aspire for and what we should aim for.
Okay, so we still have some people who are saying that President Patrice Talon, of course, has completed his 2 terms and is not seeking a third. But then they still think that this amendment, so to speak, will benefit him. You just talked about the fact that in other developed countries, systems are built to outlive and outperform people. So if the incumbent president is trying to build this kind of system, how does it benefit him when he's already done with his term in office?
Yeah, it's the same political party. You know that the same amendment also introduces a Senate where a former president becomes an automatic member. You know that the opposition leader has been barred from running. The leading opposition candidate in Benin has been barred from running, which is similar to what we've seen in a lot of countries. In Tanzania last month, in Uganda, a former presidential candidate, I wouldn't say he's the leading opposition leader since 2021, but he was a 4-time presidential candidate. He's currently serving in jail where he spent a year. He can't get bail. He can't be released. So what we see is that this is a nest that is feathered for the current president, even when he is out of office, because where he's going to move on to the Senate, where he's going to have a hand-picked president who can then do things in a particular way. Of course, I know many times that never goes that way. We saw that as the case in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the number 3 was made the number 2 according to some reports, and then things didn't go fine. We saw that in Botswana. We saw that with Dos Santos in Angola. So it is possible that he is looking at the same thing. When a person serves as a president and they're out of office, many times there are questions, because then a new team comes into office and they can begin to search what were the transactions being made, what were the dealings that happened here, and they could find some skeletons in the closet. So many times African presidents who serve their term then try to choose a predecessor who is going to be kind to them, who is going to be a puppet of theirs. They're going to be the puppet master and move them in a particular direction. That's what I see here. So it's true he's not going to stay as president, but you can see that things are being made. The discussion, things are moving in a direction that is going to be very, very beneficial to him, even as a former president.
But then what is the issue with sitting presidents or political office holders that they usually like to perpetuate themselves in power, either directly or indirectly? Does it have to do with the office? Is it that it is too attractive, or power is too interesting, if I could put it that way, that one would not want to let it go? Why not do your term, leave, and let others also have the opportunity to equally fill that position?
So generally, from what I don't claim to be an expert on the subject, but what I see is that when one leads a poor country, a country with weak institutions, the presidency tends to become even sometimes more comfortable than the presidency of those other rich, developed countries. I know European countries where you find a minister riding a bicycle to work, or a prime minister casually walking and he has maybe like a bodyguard, or a prime minister being facing trial and things like that, which is not the case with most of these African countries, unfortunately, I should say. So the presidency in Africa has become such a very lucrative position. I think if they knew the full set of facts, and you ask someone probably to be a president of, say, like Israel or a president of Zimbabwe, probably they will choose the presidency of Zimbabwe if they're selfish enough to just think about themselves, because it comes with almost zero accountability, zero checks and balances, and yet all these peaks of power. So I think that is the first thing, that it's such a lucrative position to be there. And then two, you have weak institutions. They say absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what happens is that when they get these peaks of power, let me just say this. President Museveni in 2002, the president of Uganda, was part of the people who led a mission to ensure that African presidents didn't stay in power for long. He was making very, very sound arguments that have been written about in several books now, saying that a country must live beyond a leader. But the thing is that as soon as it got to time for him to face the reckoning, he decided that he needed to stay longer. So it's a combination of factors: weak institutions that cannot hold them accountable and ensure that they leave power when they should. And I'm sure that probably in countries like the US, probably their presidents would want. I mean, you're hearing President Trump talking of another term with people like Bannon, but he can't, because the constitution is the constitution. So one, we don't have that. We don't have the strong institutions. Two, the peaks of power. In our countries, the peaks of power really are big. They come with benefits to your entire clan, your entire ethnic group, your entire religion. And because of that, even when sometimes we hear stories of the president trying to give up, people benefiting from their power, the fact that they're in power, discourage them, they dissuade them from leaving and say, continue, because they feel like he's the only one who can keep them. Yeah, so it's a combination of several factors, but those are some of them.
All right, so let's look at it from this other angle. Now, this particular reform introduces a Senate for the first time in Benin Republic, moving the country from a unicameral kind of legislation to bicameral. And we've seen some of the African countries also imbibe or emulate this system of legislature. So when you look at it holistically from different, African countries to other, and the way they've actually gone about legislating over bills, is it actually necessary, considering the political and most especially cost implication of having to run two legislative houses?
Yeah, that for me is the fundamental problem, that our politicians seem to live very large. And I'm sorry I keep referring to Uganda, but let me do it one final time. Uganda recently passed a law where former judges of the High Court, Chief Justice, and all these other people who serve in the judiciary retire, and they're given a house, a chauffeur, a car, with government fuel. They are given half of their salary for the rest of their life until they die. This also applies to the Speaker of Parliament, the Deputy Speaker, a number of ministers, and the presidents. Now, the argument is that these things make life comfortable for them. But you have to remember that the average member of parliament, the average minister in Uganda, or the average speaker or judge in Uganda is very fair, that they earn way more than the average Ugandan, a country where the GDP per capita is slightly over $1,000, and these people probably earn as much as $5,000 per month, and they go with all these specs after there. Now, bringing it back to Benin, you must look at the spirit there. The spirit there is that the president is going to appoint members of the Senate. I can almost bet that it's going to be former ministers, it's going to be these people who have who they could view as being problematic if they're not in power, people who are used to the perks of power and then are recycled and put in the Senate to keep them comfortable and going. Then you have also that the former presidents have to sit there. Now that is very, very telling, that you're having former presidents and they're creating this nice the retirement package, I should call it that, for them. So for me, the spirit of a Senate may be good. There are times when you need a second check on what the Congress will pass. You need the Senate to look at it and say, okay, we can veto that law. Okay, it's always good, even individually. For me, sometimes I ask my friends about discussions or things decisions I'm taking at work or in my daily life. But the problem with this is that you're seeing it. I don't think it is from the point of holding the government accountable, from the point of making things a bit better. It seems to be obviously more from the point of creating a place where people can retire when they hit their term of office. And that is going to benefit mainly the ruling party. It's going to benefit the ruling elite, again, at a very, very huge cost to the taxpayers in Benin, who probably needed the money for their hospitals, for education, and for road and other things that will make the country better.
Godwin, it's quite interesting that we are talking about countries who will do things to benefit their parties and their cronies, but necessarily not the people. I mean, some of these African countries are in debt, some are struggling with their economy, some are struggling with having to raise revenue to fund their budgets. Why should their focus be on trying to create establishments or institutions that favor them and would cause them to spend more on servicing those people or those positions than looking at the critical areas? And what can be done to actually put the government in check when they venture into these excesses?
That's the million dollar question right there. And I think the problem we have here is that you have a group of men. It's mostly men. I shouldn't say ladies and gentlemen. It's mostly a group of men who get power, and then it becomes really, really sweet for them that they just want to stay there. But to understand this, we must understand that most of these African states are former colonies. What really happened between the 60s, or could even go to the 50s for the case of countries like Ghana, from the 50s to about the 80s, was that we basically replaced white men with black men. So these states were set up in such a way that whoever assumed power, whoever was at the top, they were designed to benefit the imperial empire, the British Empire, and oh, sorry, my power's gone off here. I have a problem with electricity. So it was designed to benefit the bosses in London, Washington, and all these other places. So what we have here now is that the perks of power have continued, and now they benefit whoever is in power. And because when you're in the kitchen, many times you not even understand the hunger of those who are waiting for the food outside. For you just see a lot of food. That's what they see. I guess whenever they look, they see a lot of money, free money, loans coming from IMF, the World Bank, China, name it. So because all they see are the good things, they're unable to calculate and realistically work within to be prudent enough to understand that there's need to cut their cloth according to their clothes. So that is the problem that we have.
Apologies for the fact that you do not have electricity. I mean, it's part of the things we're talking about. A government not having...
Yeah, sure. That's a good example there.
Honestly, governments not having enough money to fund the infrastructure that powers the economy, but then I'm more concerned about frivolities. And that brings us to the next question, Godwin. Can governments like this who go about amending the constitution for their own purpose or selfish gains, can they actually, ensure accountability, financial accountability, democratic accountability, transparency, and doing things that actually reflects more on the living standards of the people?
Unfortunately, no, because accountability in that case would begin with them holding themselves accountable. Accountability is them depriving themselves of some perks, some benefits, of clamping down on their own power. So I see what I see so far is that in most of these countries, there are rare instances, and it's not because of our skin color or because we are incapable of doing it as Africans. We see cases where it's done, where leaders are more accountable to the people. But for most of the countries, it is not yet the case. And until it gets to a point where the citizens and the leaders each understand. Because I was just reading news here, a news article before I got online, of a former minister in Uganda who was a minister of health, and he was implicated in a corruption scandal where a lot of money was stolen. Of course, because he was a very powerful person, he didn't face trial and all, and he was released. It was a very scandalous case. But the story I was reading was that his wife was involved in an accident today. Now, one of the problems we have here in Uganda is that whoever drives a government vehicle seems to own the world literally. They drive the way they want, whichever side of the road they want. So one of those drivers of a government vehicle rammed into his wife's car, the former minister, and now she has been rushed to hospital. So when he posted that on social media and said, my wife has just got an accident, has been rushed. So an intern at that hospital said, unfortunately, your wife has been brought to an hospital where we haven't been paid for the last 4 months. Now, that is very, very telling. country. So a good system, a good country where there's accountability, where leaders work for the people, where systems are established, does not only benefit the people there and then, it benefits everybody. I mean, you don't know if you're the president of an African country today, it's not a guarantee that your children will be also be presidents. It's possible that your children could be the paupers. And then if systems are built that work as much in terms of health and education for paupers as they work for you or for the nobodies, that becomes beneficial to you. Because in Africa, we've seen former presidents being pulled out from bankers, like we saw in I think it was Ivory Coast, and then heading to ICC. So it's really important that our leaders must understand, and we must always remind them, and we must always assert ourselves as African people to tell them that these systems that they put in place, these good things, will eventually work for the benefit of all of us. Face it, we are competing against the rest of the world. It's the black people we are behind, and because we are behind, we are everybody's playground. People come to the DRC and steal whatever they want. Our people are dying in Saudi Arabia. They're dying trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea to go and slave in Europe or wherever. So until we change that, and it takes a lot on effect, to take more effort from our leaders to realize that this is not sustainable and this needs to be changed.
And talking about benefits, Godwin, and who benefits what, we're looking at a Benin Senate that would have at least 25 members, including presidential appointees. Now, underline that presidential appointees, and also former heads of state will also be a part of the Red Chamber. And we've seen some other countries who, instead of serving as checks and balances among the arms of governments, they've been more of a rubber stamp. Now, when we are in a situation where institutions are created for presidencies to abrogate or acquire more power or influence for themselves, is there a way to break that jinx in this African setting? Is there a way to limit those powers and those influences to see that presidents or the presidency does not, in a way, perpetuate himself and do things with impunity without any cause for some sort of accountability, so to speak?
Yeah, what we see right now, not just in Africa, but across the world, is that it is becoming more and more the strong man asserts himself, whether it's in the countries that we are erstwhile very sound democracies, or whether it's in African countries. That's what we see. The strong man or the strong woman, as in the case, for instance, of Tanzania, asserts himself and becomes the alpha and omega and has the final say about everything in the country. Now, is that going to change? I think so. I think all said and done, the right of people to self-determination is a very, very important right. And I'm deliberate there not to use the word democracy, because I also agree sometimes that maybe democracy shouldn't be a copy and paste. But the idea that the people of Benin have a government that serves the people of Benin, the people of Nigeria have a government that serves the people of Nigeria and puts their interest first is for me the cornerstone. It's the most important and most pivotal thing here. So I think I can only pray that this is the darkest hour before the dawn, because they say the darkest hour comes before the dawn, the hurricane before the rainbow. So it's going to be, things look glim right now, but I'm very optimistic. I know that eventually we Africans will rotate back. Even when you look at before colonial societies in places like Buganda is a very powerful pre-colonial kingdom that still exists today in Uganda, the central part of Uganda. They had a system where even then the king was accountable to the people. The king could be disposed of, and there were kings of Buganda who were disposed of, some of them even sentenced to death. So that idea, I think it is not as foreign as many people want us to believe. It is not alien to the African as many people want us to believe. It is probably there's more evidence of it in other places because people are writing their history much more than we are doing. But I think it is an African thing as much. So I believe that eventually we'll try with all these sort of things, and eventually we'll pivot back to the same thing. And that will be that the will of the people should always prevail. So the leaders, as of now, I see many of them trying to learn. Sometimes they fall short of the glory, even when they have made tremendous progress. But I believe at the bottom of my heart that eventually we'll get there.
Okay, so we'll round up with this, Godwin. So you talked about the leader being accountable to the people, right? But we've seen some African countries who have tinkered with the constitution to favor them. I'm talking about Cameroon, I think Uganda and Chad.
Yes.
You know, some other African countries. And the people have not really done anything about it. We've seen some who've actually, in Kenya and some other countries, protests. Even in Nigeria, we've seen some protests against some measures that seem to not sit down well with people. But then when you look at it holistically, do you think that Africans are too docile and are not, standing up to their government the way they should?
No, it's not. It's not a case of being docile. So, if I'm to speak, you see that each time these things happen, the pushback from the side of government is really brutal. And I for one, would not want more African lives lost. Our lives are precious, as much precious as any other life. We've been made to believe that the African life can be lost without any consequences whatsoever, and that is very, very unfortunate. But what we see, for instance, in Uganda, the last time we had an election in 2021, in fact, about a year ago, 18th November 2020, a presidential candidate was arrested, and people went to the streets, and there was a brutal crackdown that saw so many people shot dead. The official figure puts it at 54, but there are those who say that the figures could have gone as high as 150 people killed. Now, so that brutal crackdown sometimes scares people off from asserting themselves. And I understand. I am an activist. I know that it's never worth your life. Do your best, but don't go to the point where you're going to get shot because your life is precious. Now, that said, I think you don't need to look at it from the angle of the Africans pushing back, going on the streets and all this. You just need to follow the conversation. You just need to listen to them. Sometimes the Africans will tell you what they want from their leaders without even mentioning words like democracy. But the grand sum of what they're describing is a democracy, or the grand sum of what they're describing is human rights. So I feel like we know what we want. The fact that we have not really gotten out there to fight for it is not evidence that we don't. We do know. And I believe that eventually we are going to get to that point where more and more people are going to make themselves very assertive, and we'll get to what we want.
Well, let's hope so, that we will eventually get what we want. Godwin Toko, Deputy Team Leader at Agora Centre for Research, thank you so much for your time on the show.